Hey, welcome to Pianist Academy and this masterclass video where we take a specific piece of repertoire and elevate your playing to the next level. Today, we're talking in particular about Chopin's Waltz. This is the waltz published posthumously in A minor, so it's generally referred to as B-150. To start today off, I'm just going to play for you a few lines, maybe the first page of the waltz, so that you get a little reminder of the piece that we're talking about. And then we'll dive into all of the detail about playing this piece in particular. So here's a little bit of a playthrough. Okay, so there's a little bit of the first page for you. Chopin wrote around 25 waltzes over the course of his life, and some of those have been lost to history. Only 8 of those waltzes that Chopin wrote were actually published, were given opus numbers by Chopin and published during his life. There were a couple that were discovered far after his death, and this waltz in particular was actually published in 1860. So that is 11 years after Chopin's death. 12 to 13 years after it was written. And interestingly, it was published as composed by Charlotte de Rothschild. And Charlotte was actually one of Chopin's students. So in 1860, and for 95 years, until 1955, this waltz, we didn't know that Chopin wrote this waltz. It was attributed to Charlotte de Rothschild. That has changed in 1955, and since then we now know that this is one of Chopin's pieces, one of his last waltzes, actually. Despite it being one of the technically easiest waltzes, one of the shortest waltzes, it's only 2 pages and 56 bars. It does not lack in beauty, and it does not lack in plenty of things for us to talk about today. So we're going to cover a whole lot of detail about playing this piece, left hand, right hand, pedaling, a little bit of fingering. And if you want to see all of the details of all that, check out the timeline and check out the description below, and I'll list all the topics down there. But let's just jump right in. So the thing that I'd like to talk about first is actually the left hand jumps. All right. Most waltzes that we're going to encounter have lots of jumps in the left hand, and they're usually over quite a large span. In this case, most of these jumps are 2 octaves, around 2 octaves. Sometimes I guess that one is 1 octave or so, and a little bit less. But we have very large jumps to make, and doing those at tempo and easily enough that we can still focus on the melody, which is what we really should be singing and focusing on, right? That can be a little challenging, especially if this is one of the first waltzes that you are tackling. And that's very common. This is many times, this will be one of Chopin's first pieces that a student might work on. And it definitely could be one of the first waltzes by Chopin that someone might play. So I have a few tips for you for tackling these big jumps in the left hand. And I'm going to divide these into, I guess 3 sections. So first off, we know that just about in every bar, the left hand is going to play the low note. Okay? Sorry, the left hand 5th finger is going to play the low note. And then the hand is going to come up, and we have another chord shape on top. And what I'd really like you to focus on is the actual chord that we're playing, whether it's a simple triad, like in bar 1, so a simple triad like we have here, or an inverted triad, so this is a D minor chord in 2nd inversion, or here like we have a G7, it's in root position, right? And here we have a C chord. So we have these 4 basic shapes, okay? And what I'd like you to feel is what each shape feels like in the fingers. so that we could, let's say, lift the hand off the key, move it around, know exactly if we bring the hand back in this shape in particular, I can set it right on the keys, and I play that first triad just fine. I know exactly how big that shape is. I know exactly where my fingers need to go. I can know that for the first bar, I can know that for the second bar, I can know that for the third bar, I can know that for the fourth bar, right? So first, we really need to build in this idea of what hand shape, exactly what hand shape we need to be in for each of those triads, chords, seventh chords, etc. Right? Now, secondly, adding on to that, after we play with the fifth finger and we have this long traverse, this long distance to jump, right? We need to land, and we should kind of be aiming for this position in general. So in the middle of the jump from 5 up to this chord, can we make sure that our hand is falling into that same place, this place that we've trained for these chords to be? So that in midair, we're finding that shape. Now, the opposite of this, and this is something that I see kind of often, is that a student will play and then the hand will move quickly and then it'll have to reset to find the actual chord shape to play. And now we're adding an extra motion. So we have this big quick motion, which is going to make playing the low A softly a big challenge. And then we get to the top where this other chord is, and then we need to find it and shift again. So the goal with this is to eliminate one of those. We have a more slow and easy arc from the low note, and then in midair, we align our fingers in the way they need to be so that as soon as the hand comes down, we're in the right shape. Same thing with the next. Same thing with the G. I know the fingers, I'm going to play 5, 3, 1. There it is. And then 5, 2, 1. So I already know exactly the fingers I'm going to use on each of those inversions. I'm not going to change those. They're going to be the same every iteration, every repeat. 5, 3, 1, 5, 2, 1, 5, 3, 1 here. And I know exactly how my hand needs to shift, and I'm doing that in midair. And then 5, 2, 1. Okay, that's just the first line of music that we have on the page here. So we can go through and we can do the entire piece. A lot of these bars do end up repeating, which is great. But if we look at the B section, which starts in measure 17, so that's going to be down here. This is where it starts. It's the beginning of it. We get these new chords, and they're E7, E dominant 7 chords, and then again A minor chords. We can do the same thing. So we just go through all of these iterations of chord shapes, right? And we make sure that we know exactly the shape our hand needs to be in. Now we're going to add to that. Part 2 of this is going to be aiming for, well, part 2 and 3, aiming for one finger in particular as we make the leap. So what we've done is we've built in part 1, we've built in this hand shape so we know exactly where to go. Now we want to rely on that actually being there and being programmed into our playing. And now instead of aiming for all 3 fingers, we want to just aim for one. I like to start with by aiming for the 5th finger, the lowest finger. Most of the time it's going to be 5. I think actually throughout the entire piece, it's pretty much going to be 5. So we have 5 on the bottom, and then I have the chord shape, but I'm not aiming for all 3 notes. I'm aiming just with the 5th finger. I want to play 5 right in the middle of its note and trust that the rest of this, the rest of the chord shape I need to play, has been pre-programmed by my other practice. So aim for one finger. In this case, aim for 5. So each time, I'm not thinking about where all 3 fingers go. I'm just thinking about where 5 goes and the hand shape that I have pre-programmed with my other practice. Now we can flip that around, and part 3 of this would be saying, well, instead of aiming for 5 on the bottom and the top, I would say let's aim for 1. We have 5 on the bottom, we have the chord shape in our hand, but we're going to aim for the thumb, aim for E, and then aim for F, and aim for F again, and then aim for E, right? And we can continue to do that throughout the entire piece. And you might find, as you practice this yourself, that you prefer one of those over another for a specific feeling. Maybe it's easier for you to aim for 1. Maybe it's easier for you to aim for 5. I realize they look the same, but what's going on in my head and what would be going on in yours is quite different between feeling 5 be the primary connection and feeling 1 be the primary connection. Now, we don't want that to translate into an accent of one note or the other. It's simply a way for us to simplify down where we need to leap back and forth from. So we have a shape that we're leaping to, and we have a single finger, 5 or 1. I would really suggest not practicing the individual fingers. I've seen a couple videos that demonstrate just aiming for a single note like this, but they omit the rest of the chord. We aim for 5, and aim for 5, and aim for 5. And that, in principle, sounds the same, but look at the problem. As soon as I aim for 5 on the top, the rest of my hand is not in the shape that I need to play the rest of the chord. And so this is actually feeling quite different than what it feels like to aim for 5 and play the whole chord. And just playing the bottom note is not really going to help us navigate the jumps that much faster. Not nearly as quickly as aiming for 5, but still playing the entire chord shape. So I'd encourage you not to omit any notes as you go through the waltz figure in the left hand throughout the whole piece. Go slow enough that we can make the chord shape and aim for that one finger in particular. Okay? So that was a 3-part solution to navigating these left-hand jumps. Take your time and go through all of them. There aren't a massive number of them in this piece. There are a lot of repeats, which is really nice. So we can practice a few of them, and we have a great idea for how more and more of the piece will feel and will sound. So the next thing that I'd like to jump into is the waltzing figure in the left hand, and where the waltz comes from, and the feel and the sound that we're trying to give as we play the left hand in this piece of music. So first and foremost, I think we need to remember that a waltz is a dance. That's how the form originated, and we know that a waltz is always in 3/4, right? So if we have 3 beats per bar, that's a very basic waltz tempo, and even in pieces that aren't waltzes, we generally think of 3/4 as the waltz tempo. Related to that, in 3/4 we know that there's a strong beat, beat 1, and then 2 weak beats. Beats 2 and 3 are always weaker than beat 1. And that lends itself to the waltzing feel. So early in the history of waltzes, early-ish, waltzes were always considered dance music. They were music that went along with dance, that went along with gatherings and parties. And the purpose of the music was to be danced to. And there are a lot of examples of that. One of the famous examples is the Viennese-style waltz. And Strauss wrote a lot of waltzes, and they're all in the Viennese style. And Viennese-style waltzes are it's very particular style. And what you'll usually hear, especially if you go and listen to Strauss and listen to his waltzes, you'll hear the rhythm divided up in an interesting way, where the first beat is kind of shortened and the second beat is elongated. So it would be, using this piece, it would be something like this. So you hear how the 3 beats are not exactly even. It's still rhythmic, it's still metronomic, and that all has to do with the fact that when a waltz is danced, not all of the beats in the dance actually take the same amount of time to accomplish. Not all the movements take the same amount of time. So waltzes that are meant to be danced to require that sort of give and take in each bar. Chopin's music, Chopin's waltzes, it's especially important to know that they are not dance music. So we should not be applying the Viennese style of playing to Chopin's work. We can let it influence a little bit of our playing to really give it a dance-like quality, but we shouldn't be altering the rhythm in that way. And we also shouldn't be keeping it metronomic, right? So one of the things that, a couple of the things that I really like to feel as we go through a waltz figure, let's say this piece in particular of Chopin's, I like to hear especially the first note of the left hand as articulated more like a pizzicato, like on the celli and the basses in an orchestra. So while we're going to have the pedal down, the articulation of it is light, right? It's not heavy, which is that. But instead it's light. Okay, so that's the first thing. Think about the first note of the left hand being like a pizzicato. The second and third beats, they can also feel like that. They could be pizzicato strings, maybe they're short and detached wind instruments, something like that. Right? Okay, now we mentioned earlier that 3/4 time we have a strong beat and 2 weak beats. And the thing about the Viennese waltz in particular is that we have a strong beat and then a semi-strong beat and then a weak beat because of that timing shift, right? We can imitate some of that to give Chopin's waltzes a little bit of that momentum. We can imitate a little bit of that by actually having 3 distinct layers of dynamics, if you will, for the 3 beats of each bar. Okay, so beat 1, we're gonna feel like a down motion. Even though this is a pizzicato, it's a down motion into the key. Okay, so we've got a down motion there. And then we have a strong lift up on the second bar. So I'm just gonna kind of like bold that. And then the third beat is a moderate or smaller lift up. Okay? So we have a down motion in pits, a strong lift, and then less of a lift. And I'm also adding to that with some of my pedal technique, which we're going to talk about later. But here's down, up, up, down, up, up, down, up, up, down, up. Down, up. Okay, now if we add the melody to that, just so you can hear how this is all coming together. Right? So now there's a little bit more character. If I strip that all away and we just play 3 equal quarter notes, it's very simple. It's more danceable, but that is not the point of Chopin's waltzes. Chopin's waltzes are emotional, and they're more like recital pieces, if anything, or pieces that would be played in the salon of Chopin's period, pieces that you would play for each other and for family and friends and at get-togethers. And this one isn't really a show-off piece like some of his other waltzes are, but it's a very emotionally evocative. So we don't want to get locked into one exact waltz tempo that we carry through the whole piece. It can push and pull. And we're actually going to come back to that idea as we get into some of the melodic shaping and pedaling type stuff that we're going to talk about. So speaking of pedaling, let's jump into a little bit of pedaling. I'd like to give you a couple different options for how we can tackle pedaling in this piece in particular. So there are some teachers and some pianists that ascribe to pedaling each bar entirely like this. Right? And with both hands. And that's okay. And the reason behind that is that we have the bass note sustain through the entire bar, right? But we don't need the bass note to sustain through the entire bar, and especially if we're thinking about it as a pizz and not as a long bowed tone, then it makes sense that it would actually go away. The tone would go away. And it actually gives us more impulse or direction if it's not so sustained, right? Because this is just a little blurry, even though I'm clearing with every harmony change. Now, the second thing that I really don't like about pedaling once per bar is that maybe in the first bar, it kind of works. In the second bar, it kind of works. In the third bar, that right hand is getting really blurry. And then in the fourth bar, then we have all of these minor seconds that all blur together. And that sounds really, really dissonant. That's not really that beautiful at all, right? So instead of pedaling once per bar, here are a couple other options for you to consider. My favorite one is going to be accentuating the lift in the second beat like we talked about with the left hand earlier. So the pedal goes down on beat 1, and then it completely lifts and clears beat 2. Right? And so that really kind of accentuates the dance motive and the waltz motive that's present in this piece, and keeps a little bit of energy and a little bit of homage to earlier waltzes in this piece. Right? So that's generally a more clear way of pedaling. Now the second option involves a lot more work with your foot, and that's going to be pedaling just about every beat. So what that'll sound like is it's a down pedal on every beat. Instead of a lift off on beat 2, we have down, 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 down. Right? And sometimes if we have the same pitches twice in a row, like we have here, and here, and here, if we've got those pitches twice in a row, maybe we don't have to lift. But in this bar, bar 3, we've got our pedal, and it's going to come up and up and up again, right? Because we want to make sure that the melody stays really clear. Chopin's melodies it's so important that we don't blur them. Blurring them takes away a lot of the beauty of what's in the phrase. And we lose an ability to shape it exactly maybe the way that we want to. So let me go back and actually I didn't write down for you the very first way we pedaled that, which is a pedal down on the first beat and then a complete lift. And then the pedal comes back down here and we have a pedal like this and a complete lift. Okay, something that looks like that. And then a complete lift, pedal down. All right, so this was the first way we talked about with the lift. Whoops. I really like just how clear the melody stays and how nicely the waltzing figure in the left hand is separated. And if you're playing this in a bigger space, like anything bigger than a living room, if it's in a church, if it's in a concert hall, anything like that, you're actually going to want to give more space to things because the hall is going to take care of, or the larger space is going to take care of melding all of that sound together. So, yeah. Now, whether you choose this particular style of pedaling or you choose to do the other way that we talked about, which is just a quick lift for each quarter note, right, like that. Whether you choose, either one you choose, you're not stuck playing one of them in particular. You can mix and match. You might have great reasons to mix and match them. There might even be reasons to go back and pedal completely everything in one pedal. Let's say something like, we're going to get to this later, but when you have a repeat of a section, like the A theme that we have at the top here, starts again right there. And it goes until here. And it's almost exactly the same content. So maybe this bar, bar 1, we want to pedal differently. We can call that A. We want to pedal that differently maybe than bar 2, or the second time we have this same statement. Maybe we really want to highlight clean playing the first time. Maybe the second time We want it to be a little bit more tied together. That's great. And we're going to come back to talking about all kinds of musical contrast and reasons for it and all that fun stuff a little bit further on in the video today. Okay, so pedaling, you can mix it up. Those are just a couple different examples that I would steer you away from doing the full pedal for every bar, at least all the time. I wouldn't do that all the time. You can find recordings of it, but I don't think they are the best interpretations of the piece, of this piece in particular. So let's start talking a little bit about shaping the melody and kind of what that means. So we're going to go through a couple different examples in the piece. We're going to start with the first phrase, the first statement. So starting right here, okay? And just taking the right hand. Okay, so that's our first like half statement. So generally when we talk about shaping a melody, in music we crescendo or intensify as the line ascends, and then we decrescendo or de-intensify as the line descends, right? And we're going to have some wiggle room with that, but that is a great principle to follow in phrasing most of what's in this piece. And the first line is a great example. We start the melody solo, and we have two very simple bars just climbing up the A minor scale, really, right? In an interesting rhythm, the rhythm kind of repeats. Something super important is that this note, the C, is repeated, and it's repeated without a slur. So it's disconnected, and then we have a slur. It would have been easy for Chopin to slur this note to the F, like this, which would be played differently. It would make two phrases. But he didn't write that. He just wrote disconnected and then a new phrase. And to me, that screams that this second repeated C is intensifying the phrase. We have a nice line already, da, 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 da. But the fact that the note repeats without a slur means that it's calling for more. And I always like to think of Chopin's melodies as being sung. And if you relate playing his melodies to what a singer would do, if a singer was going to express something with these pitches, they would sing with more intensity. That note itself, the second C, would get an extra shape, helping it crescendo into da da da. Then there'd be a little breath. Da 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 da. We can learn a whole lot about phrasing at the piano by listening to great singers and by singing it ourselves as we're going through this. Okay? So that second C, very important. The only way now, going back to pedaling and linking that together, the only way that we can detach and intensify the second C in this bar is by actually having the pedal lift after beat 2, right after beat 2. Lift, and there's the detachment. Yeah? Okay, so we've got that note that intensifies, right? Our musical direction forward. And in general, we're also making this crescendo type shape, or overarching. Now, we probably pick up the phrase exactly where we left off dynamically. And we're presented with actually two very interesting choices about what we do shape-wise with the second half of this phrase. Because traditionally, I guess, or if we think about the first thing I said, when a statement ascends, we get bigger, which would necessitate us playing this, singing to the A, the high note, and then returning all the way back until we finish the phrase on E a couple bars later. So we intensify to here, and then everything is dropping slowly in intensity from the A down. And that's a very workable solution. It could be. I maybe wouldn't play the A so stridently in a performance, but I'm exaggerating, so you get the idea, right? So that is one possible example, that we go up to the A, and then the rest of this decrescendos back down. Now, the other possible example is driven by the harmony instead of the melody. And we have this G dominant 7 chord that resolves to C. So we're starting in A minor, and we have 2 chords, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and now this is a secondary dominant in the relative major. So we still get dominant function followed by a resolution to tonic, which says this is a type of cadence, right? We'll call it, we're in the relative key, but we'll just call it an imperfect authentic cadence because we don't have the melody. The melody is not on the root, but the bass is. Okay, so we also, because there's a cadence here, and we're going from what's functioning as a 5 chord to what's functioning as a 1 chord, we can use that harmony to say, well, I'm actually going to crescendo to the resolution. So we go all the way to the end of the bar, and then decrescendo. Now, that's only shifted by 2 or 3/8 notes, but it can make a big difference, especially when you realize just how many times we have this statement to play over and over in the piece of music. So here's going all the way across the bar line to the resolution, and then decrescendoing. I'll do it one more time. And then the flip one, the first one we talked about, was going up to the A, and decrescendoing from there. Both of those are great choices, and they have a lot of, there's a lot of precedents for us to pick one of those two, right? So what I would suggest, if you want to fly with one of these choices, is in order to make the best choice about this statement in particular, here, the bar that we've been marking up, we actually need to look at where this happens the next time, because we know that the statement repeats. And it repeats down here. And it's almost exactly the same. In fact, everything is the same until... Oh, sorry. It's not that bar. It's this bar. That was in the second statement. Okay. So in this bar, everything is almost exactly the same. We've got a little change in the harmony here. And then instead of resolving to an E, we get these 2 notes as opposed to the F and the E right with our turn there, right? So that's our one change, or a couple changes. So if we apply what we're just talking about with how we choose to shape these phrases, we don't want to shape both of them the same way, right? Now, the second one that's in measure 7 and 8, we have almost no content, no musical content at the resolution in measure 8 to work with, right? So we don't have any place to go. So that kind of necessitates us being finished with our phrase by beat 1, right there. We have to be finished, which means we can't decrescendo from here. That's not going to work, okay? So if we need to be finished by beat 1, we have to choose the shape that I marked at the top here. I'm just going to undo some of this extra stuff. So the shape that I marked at the top here, going to A, right? We have to do this one. It's really our only choice because we have to be finished making our phrase by the time we cadence. Whereas at the top of the page, we have a couple notes after the cadence. We have some ornamentation, you could call it, right? So because we have those notes, we have a few more options. So I would always say that we want to not phrase things similarly over and over again, especially not next to each other. So here is a great example of nearly the same material, but we can choose to do it in 2 different ways. So if I were to go back and redraw some markings for this top one, I would say that we are going to go all the way across the bar line, like that, right? And then decrescendo, which is different than what we're marking in measure 7. Okay, so if we look at the whole first phrase as a whole, whoops, intensifying, picking up where we left off, going across the bar, and then we're kind of starting over again. So again, we have the intensifying note here, and then a different kind of shape. Right? So that's just the first phrase. Now, this repeats almost exactly until we get down to 15. But you can see just there are so many options to go through. It's not so simple as just playing the notes, getting them right. It's not even as simple as making a nice shape, because Chopin he's written so much of the same material over and over again, which is both a blessing and a curse for us as pianists. It's easier to learn, definitely, but it makes all of our choices so much more difficult. Okay, let's take a quick look at shaping the melody in the B section. So the B section of the piece starts in measure 17, which is down here, and we're just generally going to say that it ends at the end of the page here. All right, so once again, we have a couple different options here, and we're going to follow a similar example as what I gave above. When things ascend, they're going to grow. They're going to grow and get more intense. And when things descend, they're going to get less intense, right? So the two bigger options that we have across this entire section, this entire repeated section, is how we deal with all of the turns that happen. So, for example, so if I choose to phrase it that way, I'm crescendoing up to the first one, and then a little bit back down, but then I'm almost kind of accenting. I'm drawing like a tenuto marking in here. I'm kind of accenting the first one and decreasing, and accenting the first one and decreasing. And then we would do the same thing again in the second statement. Okay? So that's one option. And generally speaking, every time we restate the turn, it gets an accent, and then we come back from that, we die away from that. Now, another general option that we could employ for this section would be something like, and I could have done a little bit more at the beginning, but growing to the first turn at the top, and then have like a mini decrescendo there, but then this entire bit, the rest of the next two bars, we decrescendo all the way to the end of the phrase. So the turns don't get re-articulated necessarily, or they don't get activated in the same way, if you know what I mean, musically. They don't get an accent. Right? We can do the same thing then after this arpeggio up. Yeah? So now, we have two options. And guess what? It's great to have two options because of the repeat sign that's at the end. So even though this isn't notated out twice like the first statement is, the first statement had to be because it slightly changes from iteration to iteration. This B section is the same thing, exactly the same thing twice. Well, every good musician knows that we never want to play the same thing twice in a row the same way. So we have two examples. We could play the first one, reactivating, reactivating. And then the second statement could be playing away the whole time. Right? So there's a great example of using both ideas that we just talked about in tandem with each other to help the music work really, really well. So I'd like to take a minute and actually, we've gone through a whole lot of this. We need to talk a little bit about fingering choices. And I'm not going to go through the whole piece and give you fingerings for every single bar. But what I'd like to do is give you a handful of bars that I think are really important to make sure that we've got good fingering. And I'll give you my preferred way of doing it, especially about the turns, the little turns and trills that we have. So first, let's look at bar 3. So we're looking right here. And in bar 3, sometimes this can cause a problem for people if we play 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 3. 5 is kind of a big stretch if we play that way. So what I'd like to do is actually 1, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3. Let me write those down. 1, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3. Okay? That leaves our stretch to 5 on the high note not nearly as wide as going from 3 to 5. And then on the turn, I do something maybe a little bit different than you might have heard before. I like playing the first note with thumb and then the second note with 4. So it's 1, 4, 3, 1, 4, 3, 2, 3. So the turn would be 1, 4, 3, and then a 2 and a 3 at the end of the phrase. 1, 4, 3, 2, 3. Okay, so we have a different finger for every part of that turn. We can actually play it remarkably fast with that kind of fingering. And we don't run into a problem with the sharp key that follows. Whereas if we tried to play this with 1, 3, 1, 2 is a little bit in the way. We definitely don't want to play it with 2, because then 2 has to cross over. We don't want to do that, right? So I also like how the fingering kind of forces you to lift the hand slightly right here, because there's a break in the slur markings. So we actually do want a little bit of a lift. Even if the pedal is down across the bar, we're going to hear a difference between lifting and coming back, as opposed to that, where we make it all just one phrase, one idea. So we need to be true to Chopin's markings and try to work in those slurs how he marked them as best as we can, right? Okay, so that's one example, and that kind of phrase is going to come back a number of times. And let's see, so now looking at bar 15, down at the bottom of the page, I like to play this with 3, 2, 1, 5, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1, 5, 2, 1. Okay? So hopefully those give you a couple new ideas. Now the turns, we talked about 1, 4, 3 on the turns, like that. I tend to do all of the turns for the entire piece using that same fingering of 1, 4, 3. So even if we go on to measure 17, where the B section starts right there, I'm on 4, I'm going to do 1, 4, 3, 2, right? 1, 4, 3, 1, 4, 3, 1, 4, 3, same thing, 1, 4, 3, and again. Okay, so every one of these turns we can apply that to. Let's go on to the next page. All right, so here we have a lot of the same material repeat at the top of the page from bar 25, but we get this new material from 31 and on. And this is going to be very important in the section we're going to cover in just a few minutes. So leading into 31, this is a very interesting part. So I still take all of the turns with 1, 4, 3. 1/4. Let's see. Oh, let's see. 1, 2, 3. I don't take them with 1/4/3. I take it with 2/4/2. And then when we get back to the next bar, so this is 2/4/2, and then back to 1/4/3, right? And the rest of this bar, after the mordant, this is a mordant. We're going to talk about mordants and these appoggiaturas in the last part of today's video. So that's a little teaser about what's coming up. So 2/4/2, and then the B gets our thumb. 4, 2, 4, 2. I like to climb down with 4, 2, 4, 2, like that. And then to give you the start of that phrase, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 5, 4, 3. So 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 4, 2. And then walking down, 2, 4, 2, 4. Same thing repeats here. I love those alternating fingerings for turns and trills where we're not using the fingers right next to each other. We really get to shake the wrist out and get something super clean and crisp. Right? So that's a really great reason for all of that. Down at the bottom of the page, looking down here in this bar with another mordant, I would actually take that because of the D sharp that follows and the type of phrase it is. I just really like taking it simply with 2, 3, and then going down to thumb on the D sharp. There's plenty of time to make that happen. And then lastly, the trill. Importantly, most of the time in Chopin, trills start on the principal note, the note that's written, unless he marks an appoggiatura. That's most of the time, that's how trills work. So we start on the E, and I like to play the trill with 1/4 alternating. Okay? And then go to second finger on the D sharp. So one more time for that. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a really long trill. It could just be a simple turn, or even just a group of maybe a 4 or 5. Very simple. Okay, so that was all the fingering that I really wanted to cover. I hope some of that is helpful, especially maybe this section, right? Okay, so we have 2 sections left to cover today. Whoops, and that is going to be, the next section we're going to talk about is playing with contrast, musical contrast, and understanding a little bit of the form itself, the form of this piece, okay? Because those things are going to go hand in hand. Generally, this waltz is regarded as having a rondo form, and rondo is A, B, A, C, A, where all of the A sections are similar or the same, the B is different, and the C is different, right? It's a little bit more complex than that, but we do get a lot of repeats of this A material, right? The material that we started the piece off with today. So if we have a broad understanding of the form, and let's see, here I'll just do some quick, here is A, this is all A, right? Well, let's put, here's B in green, and then we turn the page. Come on, anytime. Here we go. And then the C, let's put C in red. So we've got A that repeats here, and then we have this new material, right? And then we go back to the A section, and then we get a little coda at the end. That's something new. So if we look at everything all combined here, A is in yellow, B is in green, A at the top is in yellow, C is in red, then we have A again with a little coda at the end that's very similar to what we do with the A section throughout the piece. Okay, so if we understand that, I'll actually leave those up on the screen for now. Every time that we have a piece of music that repeats, we should be doing something contrasting with it. Now, we in fact already have some of those right at the beginning, or right in the middle of the first A section, because we have it actually ends here, and then we get a full repeat of everything that we just played with a slight difference at the end. So from the first time to the second time, we want to be making some different choices musically. And we've talked about different ways that we can do that just so far today. We can do that with pedaling choices. We can do it with how we articulate some of the left hand. We can do it with how we phrase the melody. We can also do it with how we choose to play different dynamics, or how much rubato we take, or gosh, there's so many different things that we could choose. So creating a wonderful performance of this piece really involves crafting all of those choices into a finished composition that is satisfying in all of the different ways. We don't spend too long in one particular feel or style. We don't spend too long in one dynamic. We don't spend too long speeding up or slowing down or staying the same tempo. So to give you an example, I might start this relatively slowly. I should mention allegretto, which is at the beginning here. Allegretto is a tempo marking that usually means somewhere between andante and allegro. Andante is a walking pace, allegro is very fast. And in the Romantic period, allegretto usually means something like between 112 and 120 beats per minute on the metronome, which is actually quite slow if you think about how fast sometimes this piece is played. But it's around here. Okay, so maybe the very first statement of the piece, if I'm going to play it around that tempo, I'm going to sing it out a little bit more. It's the very first statement. I don't want it to be too reserved. This is still part of the first statement. Now the second statement, I could be more reserved. And then we get a whole new section, right? I mean, I could flip those around. I could be reserved the first time through and then more pronounced the second time through. I think overall, the piece, this is not a joyful type of waltz. It's not anything like that. Just because it's in minor doesn't tell us that, but just how it ebbs and flows, it's kind of somber. Right? So I don't think we ever want to go so far as to say, that's not the right type of waltz. Even if we phrase the melody beautifully, it's just all around too excited and too happy and bouncy, right? It feels like a much more serious piece of music. So we need to try to keep it there. So all of our choices need to kind of be compressed into whatever that box is, until we have a little bit of freedom in the B section, which is in green here. So we already talked about making contrasting choices statement by statement of this sequence, right? Oops. And then the second time through could be like an echo or a distant thought. That leaves room for us on the next page to say, okay, well, I can do something new now. I can do something with this A section that repeats. Maybe this is a little more strained. Maybe it's not as reserved as we were at the beginning because of where we've just come from. Ooh, new harmony. And it's leaving us across kind of on a cliff, right? So I think it would be lovely to crescendo all the way from 25 into 32. That would be really nice. And then for the first time, we get this cadence back and forth motion between E and A major. We get A major. All of a sudden, we have some more liberty to say, oh, well, what if I do take it a little more peppy and a little more bouncy and a little more traditional waltz-like? Because this is like a little glimmer of hope in the piece. We've spent so much time surrounded by A minor and repeating and leaving a little bit and coming back to repeating A minor in this very sad. Even when a cadence is in C, it's not that hopeful. But when we get to 33, then we have so many choices there. Really, really, we could make it fun. And then the second time around, the second time through this section, with the small A section with the C that follows, maybe we're a little bit more playful with the A section. It's not quite as sad because of where we just come from. Now, do we want the next statement of C to be just as hopeful? Maybe. Maybe it's not so flighty, but it's more grounded and solid. But then we fall back. Right? So maybe we thought we were leaving this somber and this morose feel that we established on the first page, and we get two iterations of this theme in major. And the first time, maybe the first time is like a surprise, and we're not expecting it to be there. And then it can be bouncy and flighty and waltz-like. Right? But the second time, maybe it says like, we've been here before, I know what this feels like, it's comfortable, and I like it. It's a little more predictable, right? But that also sets us up to go back to the somber and the morose bit when the A section comes back. That says, oh, this is somewhere in between. I'm being pulled back musically, or the personality here is being pulled back into the sadness of where we started. And as long as we don't get too soft in measure 41, we're going to have plenty of room to continue to get softer and softer till the end of the piece. This is, so if I, let me start all the way in 41, and I'll play to the end for you. In 41, will be a bigger expression. And then where it starts to repeat, in the middle of measure 48, it'll really, really change and go all the way back to just how we started. Very somber, very quiet. And that ties us perfectly back in with how we started on page 1. So it's such a perfectly crafted piece of music that we could, if we interpret it really well, we could just play it on repeat, and we continue to go through this life and this expression over and over again, and it makes perfect sense. Now, what I've just walked you through is a quick analysis of the form and understanding where different things are happening, but then using that form to help guide our choices, to say, well, I know where the repeats are, I know where the A section's coming back. I don't want them all to be the same. So sometimes I'm going to play out more. Sometimes I'm going to vary my pedaling and do more lift. Sometimes I'm going to do less lift. Make it more sticky. Sticky, or like we're kind of like kneading dough. Right? Okay. So there's a whole lot of musical choices, and I've given you just a couple ones that I like. But if you know the form and you can go back through, then you can decide for yourself how exactly do you want to shape each one of these statements. And as long as you're not doing the same thing twice, and even, I would even challenge you to say, don't do the same thing throughout the entire piece. Anytime that we have the A material repeat, don't ever play it the same way. The first statement is one thing. The second statement is something else. We go on to the next page. This one-liner shouldn't be like the first or the second time. It should be its own thing. And then when we come back to it, it's something new because it's been altered by our experience in this major tonicization of our parallel major in A major. And then we can get back to 41, and now we've been through this whole experience. If we think about the piece having a life of its own, we've been through ups and downs, and we've been through turmoil and sadness, and then we've been through glimmers of hope and glimmers of joy in measure 31 through 40, the C section. So when we get to measure 41 and we repeat A, it's different all over again, right? And then the coda is so unique. Okay, there's one more thing I'd like to talk about today, and those are Mordants versus the double appoggiaturas that we have throughout this entire piece. So I need to go through and actually clear all of this, and I wish there was an easier way to do that. That'll help out some. So Mordants have a long history, and they were one of the first musical ornaments that got a definition. And in just a second, we don't have any on the first page of the score, so we can just stick with the second page here. So a mordant is in measure 31, 2, 3, 34. This guy is a mordant. And this guy, and now I'm circling the whole note, but the mordant is actually just the little symbol, right? Okay, so we have a mordant in those two places, and then we have one down here in the coda. Throughout the entire rest of the piece, all of the ornaments, let me actually put them in a different color. All of the rest of the ornaments are these double appoggiaturas, right? Those are everywhere, and they're providing the little bounce and a little bit of dance. And they're all over the first page of the score. Now, traditionally, in earlier periods of music, the mordant was played, the note was started on the beat. So if we were to play the mordant in measure, this first time through, measure 31, 32, 33, 34, this one, we would play, the turn would start with the first part of the ornament would start on the beat. That's as opposed to the double appoggiaturas that are written before the beat, where we land on the third note, the principal note on the beat. Mordant is. Okay, now that's how mordants work in earlier music history. When we get to the Romantic period, it's generally accepted that mordants mean a turn that starts before the beat. But my question to all of you, and this is something of a controversial topic, I guess. My question to everybody is, why would Chopin write double appoggiaturas in so many places and mordants in others? Especially when we consider that the mordants appear only in the major section, the C section. They don't appear anywhere else. They're in the C part of the rondo. They're in the only major bit of the entire waltz. And then we get one at the end in the coda. And it's again, it's on an E major 7 chord. So generally you go and you hear a recording of this piece of music and everybody plays the mordants the same way as the double appoggiatura. But we can even look at Chopin's own manuscript, which I have here. And if I zoom way in, it's difficult to see, but right here, we have these bars we were looking at, the C, and there's a mordant there. And then in the next bar, it's a double appoggiatura. Okay? So we have two bars right next to each other in Chopin's own hand that have two different sets of symbols. Now that's why they appear in this, I'm using the Henley Urtext edition. And that's why they appear here in this score, is because that's what Chopin wrote. So why does everybody interpret them the same way? That's my question to you. And what I'd like you to ponder is just how different will it sound if you played the C section with traditional mordants, instead of mordants that match the double appoggiatura that starts the piece off, okay? So if we play it as a traditional mordant where the turn starts on the beat, it almost sounds like a triplet kind of figure. Right? So let me show you what that sounds like. And then I've gone back to the double appoggiatura before the beat where it's circled in blue. So here's on the beat, without a break. We won't pedal a break there, but right? Now, opposed to that would be playing the mordants just the same as all of the other double appoggiatura, the grace notes that we have before each line. And if we do it that way, it's a small difference, but Chopin is famous for, especially in music where we have a lot of repeated sections, he is famous for making tiny little alterations to things. Whether it's in the waltzes or the bigger works or, oh gosh, the preludes or the nocturnes. There are all kinds of times where repeated material has a tiny difference. It might be like an accent mark where there wasn't one before. It might be a slightly different phrase. It might be a change of one pitch to make the repeat slightly different. So, despite typical romantic writing having mordants be the same as double appoggiaturas, Chopin would have known that. And he would have written all in one, all in the same format. He either, if he wanted everything to precede the beat, I would think he would have written everything as double appoggiaturas, especially when you consider that the entire piece has double appoggiaturas, except for these three instances. So to me, that says these are very important, and especially compounded with the fact that they exist in a particular spot in the piece of music that's far different from what came before it and what comes after it. I would venture, until I could find a primary source that tells me otherwise, I would perform this piece by playing them as a more Baroque style ornament than a romantic interpretation of what the mordant is. Because Chopin wouldn't have written two opposing ornaments in bars right next to each other if he didn't mean for them to be something different. He was just too great of a composer to make an error like that. So, if I was to perform this piece, and I'd encourage you, you can think about this. You know, I'm not saying this is gospel or anything in particular like that, but you can think about maybe there is a reason why Chopin wrote a different marking. And maybe for a long time, we haven't been getting this right. And until we can find some primary sources that say one thing or another, whether we discover some writings of Chopin or some of his students or something that talk about this piece in particular, or some writings by Charlotte de Rothschild herself that talk about this piece of music, I'd say experiment with making the mordant on the beat. Right? it adds just an extra glimmer to this section that's already major. It's the only major section in the piece. And it's just, it's a minute thing, it's a subtle thing, but it's all of those subtle things that add up to a really, really great performance. So I hope this entire hour or so has been helpful to you. I hope you've gained just a tremendous amount of information, and I hope this influences how you play this piece and maybe even other pieces that you're working on. Be sure, if you haven't already, please give the video a thumbs up, consider subscribing to the channel, ding that notification bell so you don't miss out on future content. And practice smarter, not harder. And I'll see you next time you visit Pianist Academy.